Hey, thank you so much for joining the show. This is great. I'm glad to see you guys here. And maybe we can go into a little bit of detail. And maybe, I don't know who wants to start, but basically what I'm looking for is introduce yourself, your organization, and what you're passionate about.
Awesome. So my name is Christine. I'm the Chief Data Officer for the City of San Jose, and I'm a part of the Mayor's Office on Technology and Innovation. And should I go straight to what I'm passionate about, Chris?
Sure, go for it.
I'm passionate about public service. I'm passionate about working on issues that are not just purely intellectual. I'm a first generation college student, and I have been incredibly fortunate to be a beneficiary of a lot of the programs that we are now working to improve. And it's been just amazing to have an opportunity to take some of my work experience and in the private sector and my education and use it to kind of, drive equitable outcomes for our residents.
Excellent. And Julia?
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Chen, and I'm the project manager and communications lead for the data equity team here for the city of San Jose. Similar to Christine, I come to the public sector from a very non-traditional background and to a very data science oriented team from a very non-traditional background. I don't have that kind of tech knowledge. Previously, I was doing marketing and development for off-Broadway theater companies. I'm also
wow, that sounds cool.
Writer, editor, so it's
we need some pizzazz in this space. It's just so boring.
So it's kind of intentionally non-traditional. I come in with a lens for storytelling and narrative, and that's really kind of the bridge I'm building with the team to take the very robust, incredible technical work that's happening and the analysis and translating it into a way that makes sense for everyone else who is a layman to this industry.
I love that. These kinds of juxtapositions are exactly the kind of thing you need to foster more innovation. This is very cool. And what's your passion?
Oh my gosh. I don't know if I can top Christine's, but storytelling again, and as well as social justice. So I didn't think I would find it within the government. It was not something I was actively seeking, but it really worked out. So.
Awesome. So let's start there. So a lot of people think that working for the government is terrible, right? People who are in the private sector, change my mind. If I'm thinking I would never want to work in the public sector, why would I?
Yeah,
have I stumped you already? This is question one.
No. I mean, I'm happy to talk candidly to it, just because I actually joined the city of San Jose from Harvard Business School. I started my role actually because of a public sector fellowship, started by folks who believe that MBAs can make an impact in the public sector, right? And that in some ways, government is actually one of the largest platforms for service delivery, and having essentially managers who care about performance and who care about equity is actually important in public life. And so that was actually kind of the pathway in which I stepped into this role. And I actually do remember some of my classmates, and honestly, even some of my mentors and friends from the private sector, they were surprised. They were surprised when I stepped into this role, because I came from a background of working in high growth technology companies and quant finance. I worked at a hedge fund the summer before.
Very different background.
Very different background, but I think it's actually so important, because I think one of the things that I actually think governments need more of is different perspectives, right? And I think I'm so much more than my LinkedIn resume, right? And what obviously motivates me to do this work has a lot to do with my background and my childhood, but what actually compels me, right, to take the job is I wouldn't take it if I didn't think I could make a difference. Mm-hmm. And I just didn't know exactly how. And I kind of just realized that bringing in analytics and bringing in, using data and bringing kind of sort of performance management measures into government is a really, really powerful way to actually make it work better for everyone, make it work better, quite frankly, in a way that, I think a lot about inclusion, right? Oftentimes when I'm working on a data set for the city of San Jose, I'm not just paying attention to who's represented in the data set. I think a lot about who's actually not there, partially because, I'm raised by parents who are monolingual. They only speak Chinese. I'm pretty sure they've never completed a survey in their life. And so I think there's a little bit of, I have a ton of empathy for the work that we do, but I'm also, it's kind of the first time in my life where I feel like I have an opportunity to marry that passion with a skill set that, you know, I think in government we need more of. And so, and it's actually really fun too. So that's I know that's like a weird way to frame it, but you know, okay, it's, if you like to solve problems and you enjoy the complexity, right, that's kind of necessary to solve problems in government, it's kind of fun, right? Like I do actually feel like every day for me does feel a little bit like kind of like a puzzle hunt. And if that's compelling to anyone who's listening to here, please, you know, please contact me, because if you like solving puzzles and you want to do, if you want to do something that can make a really positive impact on a lot of people, this is the place to be.
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting because you've got so many restrictions to deal with, and I think that makes the problem solving more interesting, because if you don't have the barriers and the restrictions, then you can't be real creative. I mean, do you feel the same way, Julia?
I can't put it much better, but I think we really lucked out with our immediate team, just in the sense that like the way we've been working, we've like formed a lot of partnerships with different programs like Correlation One, Galvanize, so like boot camps. We have a lot of team members who are career changers, who like came to data science again from very different fields. And we've also been intentional about partnering with universities and programs affiliated through universities to bring in like very driven and smart undergraduate students to like help us do this work. So I think we've been very fortunate in that most of us, like this is our first public sector job. Like we don't have those expectations about whether like something is going to be hard or impossible to make happen. Like we're only coming to, it's like what, like how much can we do given the time frame to do it? Right. So I think we've been lucky that we're not burdened by like any like thoughts like we have about how government bureaucracy like works or doesn't work. Yeah, yeah. It's like beginner's mind, right? When you first start doing something and you don't really know the rules, you tend to do better, and then once you start learning the rules, things get worse. So that's great.
And Chris, but oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah, no worries. I was thinking about so the fields that you came from, very different, right? I mean, have you had any sort of what's the word I'm looking for? Any pushback against bringing some of these ideas into your new roles?
Less than I would have imagined. And I think it helped that we were serving during a unprecedented global pandemic, right? There's nothing like a crisis to really enable innovation. I mean,
sometimes I don't think innovation ever occurs without a crisis, but that's a different story.
Yeah. And I actually think that in some ways, the pandemic really did actually put the public sector and government at the forefront for a lot of core service delivery, right? If you think about even simply the vaccine rollout, that was a government driven process, food stamps, you know, or even as, you know, schools shut down, rolling, you know, making sure that all families have access to connectivity and laptops. Those were all essentially forms of government services. And so I think in some ways the pandemic really, I actually think it served a lot of our work and really enabled the work because it was needed. It was absolutely needed. And I think it gave us a lot of creativity and freedom to move fast.
Right. So because you brought in new ideas at a time when they were really receptive to new ideas, because if it wasn't happening, then there might have been more pushback on your concepts. And I think especially Julia, with your storytelling, I mean, I can see people's eyes rolling as far as I can tell. It's like, what, you're going to bring that in here? But we're like, what we are, right?
I mean, it doesn't, I think what drives our team really, like our mission at the end of the day, it's like, it doesn't matter. And we failed, like if it's just like an intellectual exercise, if we just make a set of dashboards, and like that's it, like look at these heat maps, like that's not the point of what we're doing. Like,
oh my God, I hate heat maps. I'm looking at them like, how can anybody understand those things?
Like if our residents are not connecting to this work, like it doesn't matter what we do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Sit down and tell me a story and I'll get it in a second, right? Very cool. So you haven't had much pushback because, you know, times are unprecedented. Like, are there any specific things from your space that you've brought in that you've found are really effective in your new role?
And Chris, just to clarify, just from prior work experience?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, this is something new that you've brought in that was especially effective. Like,
yeah, I'd actually say, so there is kind of three ways we're actually quite differentiated. And one of the things that we really hope is actually this kind of the model of using data in kind of a rigorous performance way. That's pretty standard in a lot of private sector organizations and even financial firms, but we actually think some of that can really be applicable in government. And so one of the biggest differentiators for us is that we are not reliant on survey data, right? I know I joked earlier about the fact that I'm pretty sure my parents have never filled out a survey. But this is honestly.
Well, where do you get your data if you don't use surveys?
We work with the equivalent of public production data. So we're working off of things like registration databases, right? So we're looking at a program like Parks and Recreation Youth Scholarships. Instead of surveying the community, right, on whether or not the youth scholarships have been sufficient, we actually can look at 10 years worth of data that the government already has and actually pay attention to, what is the retention on these programs, right? How are they distributed? Are they concentrated in the areas that have the greatest need? These are the things that we're actually paying attention to, because when you actually work with things like production data, it allows you to actually focus on the distribution of a resource rather than just, kind of the top line spending affiliated with that program. So that's actually one thing that is quite different, but it's very commonplace in the private sector. I'd say a second way that we're differentiated is, it kind of goes back to Julia's point about us really not treating the work like an intellectual exercise, right? Like none of us are academics. We're not going in there really trying to present, kind of like high level indices, right? I think in the past, the city has taken on data projects where different departments would get a report card. They'll get something like, you scored a 76 out of 100 for social justice. And even though, that's not to discount that kind of work because it is important. But that being said, if you're telling, the head of public works that they score 76 out of 100 on social justice, they don't really know what to do with that. They probably don't even understand the rubric that informed that assessment. And so for us, we think about, data in terms of driving, in terms of creating choices, actually, right? And so we actually go very deep into understanding, okay, well, what is your day-to-day like, right? What are the metrics that you track? What are the numbers that you care about in order to deliver the service? And we basically try to create dashboards that are actually relevant to the day-to-day operations of a program. So that is actually quite unique in certain public contexts. And then the last one is we're very much focused on equity, because I think what is special about working in the government is, unlike the private sector, there is a little bit of, customer segmentation, right? You hear that term all the time. You try to prioritize certain customers. Well, government, we have a mandate to serve everyone. This is actually this is a platform where equity is a performance metric. And so we are very, very rigorous when we think about, what does equitable outcomes mean for this program? And and so before we even do any data analysis, we actually do run a kind of facilitation workshop with every program that we're studying to understand the equity objectives, metrics, and come up with a commitment to, to sort of maintaining that goal going forward. And so those are kind of three ways that I think already sets our work apart from some of our counterparts.
Right. Very cool. So Julia, how's your storytelling background been brought in?
I mean, and the focus of most of my career so far has been like the nonprofit arts industry, which is very, very different, but also very similar in the sense that I think I brought a level of like understanding how to navigate complexities and like government bureaucracy just from having to manage that within the nonprofit sphere. And I also come from a development background, so just communicating with donors translates very easily to like how to manage like stakeholder personalities and how to keep everyone on track and focus. So I think that has been my background, just like knowing how to manage expectations.
Cat herding.
Very cool. So you're saying
sorry, a little
go ahead.
addendum to that.
I'm sorry.
And also like knowing how to like communicate your story without like and avoiding the theatrics of it. Saying that as a theater person, it's like we don't want to perform. We do want to have like the work to back up what we're saying instead of just saying things for optics or to get the latest like press release.
Right. Well, you're actually trying to depict reality as opposed to a story with your story. Very cool. So I guess I got a question about when you mentioned equity early and you mentioned data equity. I read some of the stuff on data equity. I'm trying to figure out what's your definition of data equity? I guess I didn't quite, I probably haven't read enough of it, but maybe you could tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, we do have kind of our mission statement. So happy to share that with you. So data equity is using the city's data ethically and in ways that drives equitable outcomes for our constituents. And so, um, that's sort of the mission statement. And every new person who joins our team, like we not only share the statement with them, but we're also I'd say we're quite explicit about our mission and values. So I'll talk a little bit about that, but Julia, please jump in because this is something that we kind of crafted together with everyone else's feedback. But we actually have this exercise called the pre-mortem so when I worked in tech,
Pre-mortem, I love it.
yeah,
I gotta use that.
we all know what postmortems are. It's like when something bad happens, like we all have to do a postmortem, and it feels kind of like,
pre-mortem sounds so much nicer because it's pre-death, right? As opposed to.
but it's also embedding intention in our work from the beginning, because we know we actually do know what failure looks like, right? At the end of the day, if our residents interpret our work as just dashboards, right? Or, I don't know, just like us, a bunch of kind of data analysts in government just kind of creating a report and an intellectual exercise that would just maintain, like if that's all it is, we have actually failed. And we say that very, very explicitly. And I think it also translates into even the folks that we bring on to our team. Chris, I had mentioned that, we lead a team of 20. There's parity. So it is not just a pure team of data scientists. We have storytellers. Julia is actually not, we actually had a really wonderful summer fellow, Jason, who is a data journalist, right? So it's a combination of folks who are professional storytellers, folks who are community organizers, and data scientists. And we really actually think that it's those three kind of lenses, like having them in conjunction is how we sort of meet the statement that we just read.
Excellent. So can you give an example of an outcome that came out of your work?
Yeah, I can talk about one of our most mature projects with Parks and Recreation. And Julia, feel free to jump in on actually just talking through the community engagement piece. So Parks and Recreation, especially during the pandemic, one of the things that we just want to highlight is in the city of San Jose, there's a lot of city-run youth programs that make, honestly, after school and summer camp affordable for underserved communities, right? So when we think about Parks and Recreation, I'm not just talking about the physical parks, I'm talking about essentially childcare for young people. And there was interest in trying to understand if we were fully meeting the need. And so an example of an analysis that we did was actually looking at that, registration database, right? I think, Chris, if you've ever signed up for a class at Parks and Recreation, then, there is a record. There is a record. Yeah. There's actually a lot of really interesting data, even in paying attention to, not just what you signed up for, but if you came back, how far did you have to go? How far did you have to go to your nearest rec center? Are you commuting a lot from one recreation center to another, right? And being able to do this kind of analysis is kind of how we're able to even suss out some of the more nuanced aspects of need beyond just affordability, right? One of the really interesting pieces of analysis that we noticed was that over the last 10 years, 96% of recipients of scholarships, right? So subsidies for these programs, they lived within 1.5 miles of a community center, right? Wow. We also noticed that the number of new people that we were serving has actually gone down. And so it's a really interesting story of retention, where when you have a fixed pot of a resource, right? So fixed funding for a program, we're doing a really great job, like helping the folks who just happen to know about the program. They're coming back, they're probably telling their immediate circles of friends, but it's us realizing that it also positions us in a less favorable way to go and reach out to the folks who've never been served before, but may need it even more. And so that's kind of the level of nuance we're able to do, just kind of from a data perspective. But again, if that only stays as an intellectual story, we have failed. And so one of the things that we're really proud of, and this is partially due to Julia's leadership and some of our wonderful summer fellows, was actually bring that work into the community.
Very cool. So, I mean, one of the things I noticed, and we were talking about data, and a lot of the companies I've worked with, and even in government, the data is not good, right? Let's just say that. Yeah. How have you been able to make sure that the data is relatively accurate, or is not missing huge chunks of it? Or
yeah, I would say the only way you could actually do that is by introducing other data sources, right? That's a very
Right.
technical term, but like in context of government, it means going to the community. It's about having, I'd say, the humility to know that the data set you work with is not, it's not the only source of truth. And it might give you enough insight to know where to start when it comes to having other conversations, but it's not the only one. And I'm actually going to have Julia talk about just tactically what we did on the community engagement side.
Oh, very cool.
And I think about like using the registration data we mentioned, that's only positive data. We only have like the system only captures like, folks who have signed up for these programs and received scholarships. We have no data on like who doesn't receive this assistance. So what we did,
Right.
so prior to the summer when we had our summer cohort of incredible fellows, we just didn't have the internal capacity to do this work ourselves. You can ask anyone in any industry. Community engagement is probably one of the most difficult and underserved like functions in many places. So I can't speak as someone like, we can't speak as best practices because we were piloting so much of this ourselves, but just in terms of learnings, we had 3 fellows join us this summer, one from MIT Sloan, Stanford, Georgetown. They were just very bright, very committed to community engagement as well as just education policy broadly. So they were coming in very passionate about doing this work. And our mandate between Christine and myself was just, we need to create or build out a system that is sustainable and can be replicated for other city departments to pursue this kind of work in the future. Just because I think it is very hard work. And I think the city is just so stretched thin, especially with the pandemic, that it's hard to do this consistently. So we were up against a lot of just this general distress that you might imagine from folks who just, like the city might reach out once and never again. So just in terms of touch points, the community was lacking this. So what our fellows did to start, we courted many of our peers in different cities who are doing this kind of work. We spoke to folks in New York and just kind of said, like, how do you start? Like, how do you build something like this? And we spoke to some outside consultants that do engagement work for cities. So what we basically ended up with was first just a lot of cold calling, cold emailing, like just the nitty gritty work that a lot of folks don't want to do, but that's the legwork that has to happen. So from there, our team reached out to, I think, over 300 communities, partners, individuals who serve these communities in San Jose, and decided to, okay, we need to give 10 to 15-minute presentations. These people are very busy. They might not know who we are to begin with. So how do we get our feet in the door and talk about these programs? So we took just a lot of the robust data analysis that was done, and they condensed it into these very just like short, snappy presentations, just very simple questions. Have you heard about the scholarship program before? If the answer was no, and many of the answers were no, like they just did a very kind of brief introduction and was like, is this something that you're further interested in? And so from that initial batch of 300, we did like over 60 community presentations. And then of those interested parties, they held 3 roundtables at the end of July. And from there really kind of got those like on the ground, like anecdotes from folks and filled in a lot of the gaps that the data was missing.
Well, that's very cool. So what, and what resulted of that? Were you able to get a lot more, like, did you increase the number of attendees or registrations to the programs, or
yeah,
what was the outcome?
So we formulated several kind of just outcomes from that, in the sense that we created a survey just to help community partners distribute to like their families and parents, just to kind of gauge the level of interest in these programs and the folks that need the help from these programs. We distributed, I think, 2,000 flyers total through community partners like in multiple languages, translated in-house, just to like get the word out there, just get the knowledge out there, because that was the primary gap. People did not know that Parks and Recreation was offering these services, because there's so many competing programs in the city from different organizations. So just getting the knowledge out there, I think, was the first step. We haven't seen the return yet, but I think just building those connections has been really important.
Yeah.
Well, you'll probably see some return. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, Chris, no worries. The one other thing to add is, I think sometimes folks forget that there's actually a ton of resources out there, but what's really missing is it's that bridge, right? And so one of the things that we actually communicated on the flyers is that, so the Biden administration, as part of their COVID-19 relief package, actually has a program where folks can get childcare expenses reimbursed 100%, right? And so, historically the city subsidizes it up to 75%. This is kind of the first time where folks can get this resource for free. And so we, that's, when Julia was talking about us distributing those 2,000 flyers, that, this was kind of on the grounds, not, knocking on doors, getting the word out to really kind of tackle the gap in, the gap in being able to afford these programs. But the other thing that I think really kind of helped, it kind of came out of these community conversations, is around need, because we need to remember that the government's ability to understand need, that's actually a data problem.
Yeah.
It's not, because we are choosing to tag some people as needy and some as not, right? And we use that to make decisions on who gets what. That is, it's actually a data problem. And one of the really interesting things about Silicon Valley specifically is that the census data can sometimes miss the nuance on the ground, right? So here's I'll throw some fun statistics, but I think it really puts things into perspective. So right now, the way a family can qualify for the scholarship is if they demonstrate that their child is on free and reduced lunch, right? And the upper bounds of qualifying for free and reduced lunch, which is a federal program, is about $35,000 a year. The lowest income council district in San Jose, the median household income is about $78,000, right? And that's considered our poorest.
We're special.
Yeah, we're special. But then that's actually just such a simple way of just seeing the gap, right? So why are we using a federal metric of need when the need in Silicon Valley actually looks really different? And so what's actually coming out of it really is actually, we're looking at revising the scholarship forms. We're looking at, what other types of data can we start asking families to share, and how can we actually start localizing the need? Like, how can we actually use our platform as the city to assess need in a way that's, within the context of our own community?
Well, is there like a standard of equity that we're looking for? Like, has that been defined, or are we looking, is it just, are we looking for that standard?
I would say and Chris, let me know if I'm interpreting the question correctly, but I would say our operating model, the way we work with each department, is we actually try to personalize. We understand that equitable outcomes look different for different programs, right? And so, for example, with youth scholarships, those programs are not designed to serve everyone in San Jose, but equity is actually making sure that with the limited resources we do have, we're serving the folks with the greatest need, right? Versus, another program that we supported and that we're making a presentation to City Council next week is the San Jose 311 program, right? 311 is the city's non-emergency response system. That is actually a digital platform that is designed to try to make access to, city services more equitable. And so it's kind of the difference between a total addressable market, right, of 1 million plus residents, and a total addressable market of perhaps, the 25,000 or so families deemed low income according to the census. And so it's hard to use the same equity standard for these two different programs. And that kind of informs the way we work with the data and the way we help these programs align on equity objectives.
Interesting. So have you thought about using sort of like non-traditional data sources as well, like social media and things like that in your analysis? I don't know how much Jill, we're talking to, I would maybe just at a very high level, the answer is yes. We're really lucky to have the Knight Foundation supports our work. And I think what's been really cool about what we've done so far, data equity, is that it has really kind of opened the doors for us to kind of look into other ways we can kind of expand the data set, right? And so without giving up too much, because I think some of this is, some of this will probably be shared in the next couple months, right? If we take an example, like a case study like 311, we know that 311 is not the source of truth, right? The tickets reported in 311 is not, it doesn't necessarily represent all the actual incidents that need servicing, right? We know that there's that gap. And so we are starting to look into other ways we could introduce, beyond data sources, right? Like other channels of engagement to try to make that data set more, more complete. Interesting. So if somebody wanted to sort of augment your data set, could they contact you and say, hey, this is incorrect, this is correct, this is what needs to be changed? Or
I think it actually kind of happens already, at least through the city's open data portal. So San Jose does have an open data portal, and people do take, I mean, I'm not active on Twitter except for when someone tags me and basically puts together a really fun like visualization using San Jose 301. That's when I usually like to respond. So actually the last one that I thought was really fun was someone basically took a look at the open data set around parking violations and found out that the highest by 10x is actually at like the Hilton Garden Inn close to San Jose Airport, right? So for some reason, there's just like a disproportionately high number of parking tickets at that one location, right? And he did this really fun thing around actually kind of building out these beautiful kind of 3D bar charts and putting it on a map, right? Yeah. And so, you know, there's already that kind of engagement from kind of like, honestly, the geeky residents of Silicon Valley who kind of just go, they like playing.
We're all geeks here.
Yeah, I mean, and which is so great, right? And it's honestly, it's a privilege, right, to serve a city that actually already has this sort of program. And so for me and Julia, we think that the best thing we can do is actually to kind of provide a level of responsiveness and kind of feedback when we have residents engaging with us in that way.
It's really cool. I mean, we did something like that when I was with Palo Alto, and they were looking for something to do. I mean, they had a tough time actually getting people to look at their data source and do something with it. And it sounds like it's really cool that these ones are happening in San Jose. I mean, have you ever been able to, like, do you have a whole developer ecosystem around the open data piece? Or, I mean, is it just sort of like a free-for-all API that anybody can sign up for?
It's a free-for-all API, but we do use OpenGov, right, which already comes with its own suite of APIs and tools. But actually, a lot of the analysis that we do in-house with, you know, with the production data, we don't share the data out, but what we do is we actually share the frameworks and our code. And so, so a lot of kind of the methodologies, right? So for example, even, you know, I'm going to go back to the registration database because since we've talked about it, right? But even looking at 10 years worth of registration data and being able to parse out, okay, how many of them were duplicates, right? How many of them may be, you know, families who share a household, right? Like being able to kind of, you know, process the data with that level of nuance. We actually have a lot of that in a GitHub, and we do, you know, we're kind of at a point where we have really great counterparts from other cities reaching out to us, because honestly, you know, a lot of, you know, the Parks and Recreation programs in other cities, they're not run so dissimilarly from ours. And so they're actually really interested in seeing how we approached our analysis, and we put it on GitHub. So it makes it easier for us to share that code with them.
And it's so cool because you're not really competing with them, right?
No, not at all. I feel like there should actually be more collaboration across cities because a lot of them use the same technology, right? So for example, like, I mean, we use a software called ActiveNet, and you know, I was on a call with like the Tucson Parks and Recreation Department, and they also use ActiveNet. And so a lot of the learnings we, you know, even on like ETL side, right, on the extraction side, we were like, well, we should actually share this with other cities who use.
Of course, right? Why not, right? I mean, have you ever implemented any of those things from other cities here in San Jose?
Yeah, actually, Julia, I'll go back to you because we talked to Oscar Romero about the New York City's community engagement plan.
We did. So like they did have, so New York is at this like a North Star for us in many ways. So they did speak a lot about kind of like the initial investment that has to go into that work, which is what we drew upon and kind of motivated us to like not be so wary about just the hours that you have to put in upfront just to make this work happen. Like if there are any technical findings, Christine, that we learned from peers.
Yeah, I mean, New York City, the reason why it was good for us to, you know, talk to us as part of our discovery process is because they also serve just as, I mean, San Jose is one of the most diverse, San Jose and New York, they're some of the most diverse cities in the US, right? They face, you know, when we think about service delivery, we think about even data and and participation in surveys, right? The challenges in New York are not so dissimilar in San Jose, at least in terms of, digital literacy and just general literacy. And so because New York City, they honestly have a much bigger team. They've actually built a lot of really great playbooks around community engagement that we sought mentorship from. It was really, really helpful for us to actually learn what worked and what didn't work in New York City. And then as we started building out the foundation for community engagement in San Jose, we built off of their learnings. So there is now, I think, especially because of the pandemic, there is not now like starting to be kind of a community of practice, I think, in the civic innovation space, where a lot of us are starting to talk to each other and trying to collaborate more.
Very cool. Very cool. So are we using any kind of networks of IoT devices or anything like that, so sort of gather additional data outside of the kind of stuff you're talking about?
No, not yet, but
okay.
Chris,
we don't have sensors under every parking spot.
Well, no. Let's touch base in 30 to 60 days, because there may be projects in place that I, cannot confirm, but I do. Yeah. But I know I'm still new to the public sector, so sometimes I'm like, so much of it is sharing certain things at certain times.
Right.
But it's I think I like your point about IoT, but I mean, I think the other thing I like to push though is I don't want folks to read about our work and feel like it's unattainable, right? Because most cities in the US, most cities in the world are not ever they're not going to get to a point where they could even think about IoT sensors, right? Most cities don't have, self-driving cars just running casually down.
Oh, come on, but we should be, because this is San Jose. Come on, we should be at the cutting edge of all of this stuff.
And we already have some, right? But I think so much of what so much of storytelling and connecting the work with the community is also just showing what can be done with just summary statistics, right? Really powerful summary statistics can already drive better decisions and better outcomes for residents. And that's kind of where we'd like to push people to start, right? Where, yes, of course, we can have, actually, Chris, attend the Smart Cities City Council meeting next Thursday, which is open to the public to learn more, right? But yes, we can have something like that. But I also love the idea of just encouraging cities who don't have fully fledged innovation teams to just start with summary statistics, right? Start with don't even start, start with production data.
Yeah, well, you already have so much data. I mean, that's one of the things that so we were helping to build Palo Alto's Smart City Initiative, and they had so much data, they just didn't know what to do with it. And we helped them decide, okay, this is the areas you want to grow in, this is what you can do with it. I think that's the same situation with most cities, is that they have tons of data, they just don't know exactly what to do with it. They just need a structured plan to figure that out.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think cities have more in common than most people realize. And so I think, I'm excited, especially in the coming months, right? Just to start sharing more, share more of our work more publicly, and to go a little deeper in the work too. Like, I think Julia and I think we've also been looking for opportunities to kind of get a little bit more tactical and hands-on, even in how we share work, because we want to learn from other cities, but we also want to make sure that, the things that we found working in San Jose, that we're also kind of supporting other cities that might want to pilot it.
Very cool. Very cool. So Julia, do you have an input on that?
No, I think it's just where so most of our summer cohort has moved on from the summer. So we're back to a much more lean team. So I'm excited to see what we can do and to move quickly again in terms of just sharing some playbooks, creating some playbooks.
Very cool. All right. So it's time to think like a futurist, right? Where are we going to be in 10 years? Where is the city of San Jose going to be in 2031? Where do you want to see it? Where do you want to see it in 2031? Okay, you guys are both on mute.
Julie, do you want to go first? If not,
I mean, I can just speak broadly, but speaking as, a layman, the audience I'm trying to write for, I think it would be great if not just San Jose, but cities broadly, residents felt empowered to be more proactive in approaching their governments and seeing what data is available and working with it and interacting with it and feeling empowered to use it. That is my kind of broad mandate for what I'm doing and just what I hope for as a resident of a city.
Yeah. And I mean, building off of Julia's point, right? I think sometimes when you challenge us to think like a futurist, the tendency is to go straight into the technology. But I mean, we serve a city where the technology is already there. And yet really, sometimes, basic things like just access to childcare isn't. And so, 2031, man, I hope we figured out childcare. right? Like I hope we
At
figured
minimum,
out
right?
basic social services. Those are, and Chris, I promise you, it's not because we're trying to think small, but I think so much of serving in the public sector is actually also paying attention, beyond just thinking forward. Like it's important to be forward looking, but we can't, we can't be forward looking without also making sure we have the right foundation where everybody can kind of move forward together.
Right. Well, it's interesting you should say that, because I got here in 1999, and I realized that we're actually pretty behind, right? Boots on the ground when it comes to foundational work and what we have to, we're not really all that high tech in our governments or in our infrastructure. We seem high tech from the outside, but when you're actually here, we're like, there's still so much work to be done, right?
Yeah. And I think what's really unique about Silicon Valley, right, is just the socioeconomic inequity, right, where the gap between the haves and the have-nots, it just grows at a much, much faster pace than a lot of other cities. And so when we think about, okay, what are the challenges of serving in the public sector right now, throughout the pandemic, but also in terms of when we think about recovery from the pandemic, that gap has only grown. and that's why, like, thinking like a futurist, oh my gosh, like there's actually a pretty clear metric for success is doing everything we can to try to grow that gap. And I don't know, I mean, I'm sure technology can solve some of those issues, but it's also going to require, better service delivery and better policy.
Right. So I guess it's interesting what you said, Julia, earlier about sort of like being able to, what's the word I was looking for? You said it so well. It's something to do with being more involved in the government. How did you describe it?
Engaged, empowered.
Yeah, engaged, empowered. That's it. So what do you think we need to do to sort of help, open up that pathway so people are more engaged and empowered?
I think I'll just say something, a little something, building off of Christine's last point on like thinking like a futurist. I think there is, and it's not inherently a bad thing, I think there is a lot of motivation to like pioneer the like latest shiny thing, especially like within Silicon Valley, and just kind of not paying as much attention to like what already exists. So I think just building up that existing foundation is kind of like the way forward and like the gateway we all should be pursuing to begin with.
So we don't all need just another app on our phones.
I think we're good.
Like a really snazzy new app.
Oh, we need to make that app, we need to make the existing app better.
Make it better.
Yeah, we need to make it better.
Well, is there an existing app right now? And what can you do with it?
You could download the San Jose 311 app and you could use it to report graffiti, abandoned vehicles, potholes, etc.
Oh, good. You can do potholes? I would love to do potholes. But does it integrate with my Apple Maps so I know it knows to tell me to, hey, actually go into this lane instead of that lane?
No, Chris, it does not.
That's what I want to see. Well, you see, we were some of the stuff I was thinking about. It's like I was in Denver once, and we were talking about like toll roads and versus toll roads. And I thought, wouldn't it be cool if you could actually track which lane somebody is in, and then actually charge different toll rates based on the lane that you're in? I mean, we're not thinking about doing anything like that yet, are we?
If we are, we can't talk about that yet.
God, you guys are more secretive than a private company.
That's in the innovation vault. Chris, some of our projects are still in stealth mode.
Yeah. Well, so speaking of that, so do you guys have actually a lab in-house where you can do POCs of all these ideas that are bubbling up?
I'd say, and Jordan's a good person to talk to about this, but so Jordan, who's the Chief Innovation Officer of the City of San Jose, he likes to kind of describe our office as a venture studio, right? Mm-hmm. Where we basically find, and I think, again, this is kind of one of the really great mandates, right, of working for an elected official, is you can actually be that, you do have a mandate to be forward thinking, and in some ways kind of, it's a little easier to run pilots, of new ideas. And so that's kind of the venture studio model where we will build kind of pilots. So data equity really kind of came out of a $60,000 pilot, right, from the Knight Foundation. The digital inclusion program, which has gotten, I think, a lot of attention this past year, was also an example of kind of a small pilot we ran that we were able to eventually kind of scale and grow and then embed into the city manager's office. And so, and I actually think that's a really good operating model for other cities as well, to basically leverage the mayor's office to go and try new things, right? Do the things that's really, really hard for the city manager's office to do. But once you have a proven concept, rather than kind of tie the work to, an elected official, right, whose term is going to inevitably end, see if it's something that you can actually embed into kind of the function of governing.
Right.
And that's
Very
really
cool.
the long-term goal for our work, Chris, is, and actually we're on track. So this is something we can share is we were able to pass a budget message around data equity in the June 2021, city budget. And so a lot of the work that, we've been piloting and building this past year, we're planning to transition and embed that permanently into the city manager's Office of Civic Innovation, and hiring a full-time data science director to oversee the portfolio.
Oh, fantastic. Congratulations.
Model. Yeah, thank you.
That must have been a lot of hard work to put that together.
Just a little bit.
Well, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much. So do you guys have any, can you tell us your contact information? So if anybody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Yeah, Julia, maybe pointing folks to our Medium and our Twitter is a good start. Yeah.
We do. So we have.
And you said you didn't do social media. Come on.
I'm also social media manager as well. But wearing of many hats that nonprofit has taught me to do.
That's
but
your
we
gig?
do have multiple links. I'm always ready for new gigs. We have like San Jose MOTI, that's MOTI. We have a Medium page that has a lot of our kind of like the projects we're working on, our methodologies can all be found there. And we're also on Twitter at San Jose MOTI.
Fantastic. You guys need to do a podcast. Julia, I love your voice. You have such a podcast voice. You should be on NPR or something like that.
I've been told I have like ASMR voice, which I'm not mad about that. So I have a voice for radio.
You have a voice for radio. Julia, I would listen to your voice.
Oh, see, you can do both video and audio podcasts, just like I do, right? Even though I have a face for radio.
Like, one of those calm, like sleep stories, like let me record your meditation app. Like,
yeah,
do it.
Yeah, I can see that. You
Read
could
out
be like the voice of
calm.
See, that's not what we don't want to put people to sleep.
That's true. No, people would be galvanized if they hear.
I love it. Well, thank you so much. This has been great. And I'll put links to all of your stuff in the show notes. And hopefully, are you looking for people? You mentioned earlier that all of your summer interns were going back. So I'm assuming you need people.
We're always hiring. And so definitely we would send folks our way. Like if folks are interested in, getting their feet wet, trying out civic innovation, or just in general, learning more about what we do, we'd love to chat with them. And I'm not very active on social media, but I do have a personal Twitter. It's at Christine Keung. And I do respond if you tweet data at me.
Okay.
Also, I
Sounds
monitor
good.
her personal Twitter now. So if she doesn't get to it, I will.
Oh, very good. Awesome. That's great. So thank you so much. This has been great talking with you.
Great. Thank you, Chris.
Have a good one.
Bye.
Talk to you soon. Bye.